Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Question I'm going to ask you. I love this question. The reason I love it is because it characterizes the state of AI right now. This isn't against anybody or any one company, but I'm going to ask you this question. Would you short NVIDIA right now?
Goodness. Al, you know what? Thank you. I got to be careful about giving you questions.
Yeah, I'm going to take notes. Hold on. I'm taking notes so I know.
I love asking that question. I don't love answering the question, but I'll try. And I should disclaim too, I have a cousin who I love. She's one of my favorite cousins. Not my favorite, but one of my favorite, just so in case my other cousins are going to listen to it.
You better be real careful.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And she works at NVIDIA. She's been there for a while, and I would not wish any bad on her. So I'm just going to say that I love her, and my answer is not reflective of anything that I wish onto her. I think NVIDIA is a short more than a go long. And I'll tell you there's 3 reasons why. First, I think it's like 165th place for revenue. So it's like, I think it's doing about 65 billion in annual revenue. And its market cap, at least the last time I looked, is like 2 point something, which I think puts it at number 3. So it doesn't make sense that a company that's 160 something in terms of revenue is third biggest. That's all hype and inflated kind of expectations. So I think that's one from a kind of a number side. Number 2, like something like 30 or 40% of their revenue comes from like 4 or 5 major companies. And, you know, that would be like the AWSs and the Azures and, you know, other folks who are using Facebook, who are building out these tremendous GPU farms because they're trying to get ahead of training of LLMs. Every single one of those companies is working on a competing chipset, which I think presents a long-term risk for NVIDIA, right? And I think it's just the question, is the moat big enough that are they going to catch them? Which in case 34 million revenue kind of substituting over time could be a pretty big hit. I think that's number 2. And then number 3 is I just think the market is moving to smaller models. And I just don't know how many people are going to build these massive GPU farms. Like I'm doing some really cool stuff on my MacBook now that's got like a CPU and very limited GPUs. And like this is pretty early in the game. I think most companies would prefer to kind of run most of the inference, right? Not the training, but the inference on CPU versus GPU. And I think that's going to kind of limit the market. Al, those might have sounded like really good answers. That's because I asked the question so many times. That's the favorite answers that I get back. So if you're asking me, like, would I really take my money and make an investment in a short? Yes, I would tell you that I am like the most conservative investment. So I would say that I would call my broker and ask him or her what I should do, and I would probably follow their suit. I'm a believer you got to know your swim lanes, right? It's good to have a point of view, but I know this is an area that I'm better off outsourcing than doing myself. So I would take my broker's position on that.
Look, I tend to agree with you, just to put my money where my mouth is, just because, look, it's been up, 2,000% over the last, 5 years or whatever. I mean, right there's a hype cycle that you're going to go through that we haven't even mentioned. Not to mention the technology piece. I do agree with you that the models are going to get smaller because, it's a cost issue as far as I'm concerned. And look, I just installed Mistral on my laptop and I use a CPU. So far, it answers every question that I've asked it. Well, so having said that, and I don't want to skip around too much here, we just introduced the concept of an Instruct lab, which allows you to add skills and knowledge essentially into the main large language model. Isn't that kind of a case contrary to what you just said, though?
I don't think it's contrary. No, so I'm really excited about Instruct Lab, and I'm just going to do a quick shout out to the IBM research folks because they're part of this role. I'm reaching into the research team, and we got research team. Think of them as kind of like working on tomorrow's problem, and then we got product management, and we got developers who are taking the research work and bringing it into the product, and then we got the go-to-market function. The research team are just like some of the most impressive people. Like sometimes we talk about competitive corporate strategy. And if you think about the differentiators one company has over another, having the people who are in IBM research working on some of the world's biggest problems, which happens to be a line or a segment of our mission statement as a company, is like so comforting and something to be so proud of, right? So I can't speak highly enough about some of the brains and the level of empathy and passion that some of our research folks have. So part of the output of that work
Right.
is something called Instruct Lab. And the genesis of this is, most of these models, they either fall in one of two categories. They're either open or they're closed. And probably one of the biggest misconceptions I think in the market right now is OpenAI has open in its name, but that would be an example of a closed model, right? You don't really know the data that was trained. You
I
can't
agree.
just get the parameters, the weights, and but there's other companies out there and other models like Meta that release Llama 2 and 3 as open models. IBM just released a open model of our model called Granite. But Instruct Lab is kind of above that. Let's take Llama, for example. If you have Llama that's open to the open source community today, and then somebody wants to take it and they want to do some training to it and put their own data into it, they are basically taking the Mama Llama, which rhymes, Mama Llama, and creating baby llamas. But all of their contribution doesn't go back to the open source world. You're creating like a Mama Llama and then multiple baby llamas, and the baby llamas don't really contribute back to the Mama Llama, which is the complete opposite of open source, right? The whole point of open source is you got a slew of contributors who are all doing their little part to kind of contribute back to the source. And then everybody who's taking the source gets the benefit of all of that work. Instruct Lab takes that core model and then, like you said, takes skills and knowledge, the same way people learn, right? It's the way that I use an analogy, and maybe not is a perfect analogy, is like if you have a general model of what it's like to travel, right? Or maybe English and Spanish, and then you happen to go to Japan. Like you're there for 2 or 3 days and you're learning new skills and new knowledge. You could extrapolate that out and say, hey, based on this experience of being in these places, this is probably what it's like to be here for 3 months or 6 months. And then you're just taking those new skills and knowledge and you're bringing them back and putting it into the model. And it's better for everybody. The model is now different without respinning everything I had in English and Spanish. I'm just contributing this new piece of information. We extend it out by syndicating the data, and then we teach the model just on that delta piece to make it enriched, which gives us an ability to kind of contribute back to the core. Let me tell you a use case of why this is so exciting. I was talking to a large company that has 12 different groups that are all doing model development. Each one of those groups has such pride that they don't actually want to work together. The company and the chief data officer or chief analytic officer in this company is looking at it and saying, I now have 12 different model creations off the same base open model. If I can use Instruct Lab, which is basically interacting the skills and knowledge through prompt tuning or prompt engineering, right? So I'm doing prompts and I'm basically teaching it new skills. And then I can put that back into a base that is shared across everybody and everybody benefits from it. Like that unites the team and gives everybody an advantage that didn't exist before. So these are like not small changes. This is really, really amazing. And what's amazing about IBM and how they did it is they actually open source this. So they created a paper. It's available for anybody to access. It's not like an IBM proprietary thing. We want people using it because we think it's going to be game changing and it's going to help everybody. And that's part of the trust, right? And being an open company. So really excited about Instruct Lab.
I don't think anybody else is doing that today yet, at least not that I've seen. Have you seen anything like that in the industry? I haven't.
The speed of innovation is so fast, but maybe by us saying this on this podcast, somebody somewhere is going to kind of create it. But why create it if it's already there? Plus, you got all the hours of IP that the research team put in. I do think it's very differentiated. I could be wrong. There could be somebody else around the corner. I haven't seen it, and most reactions are really positive.
We're obviously moving extremely fast. What technologies are you most excited about right now? Is it the Granite models? You mentioned that. Maybe you want to give a quick overview of what makes Granite so powerful. I know you've been a huge advocate there, but what else?
So I think the models, I'm excited, but I'm kind of, the incremental differences are becoming smaller and smaller, right? Like there was a race for the biggest model, and there is value in certain use cases. Like, there is a mathematical equation that if you take a massive data set that you're training on and you have a ton of GPU, that you're going to get incrementally more accurate over time. So that supports probably consumer use cases where you're kind of getting to the right answer. And there's going to be that continuation, like an arms race of who's got the biggest model. And we'll probably see that. That doesn't excite me too much because I think I saw a survey that something like most companies use 5 different models. And I think that's just a recognition that it's probably not going to be one single model that's going to win it all. It's probably purpose-built models that are going to do one thing like a RAG use case or summarization or classification. Different models are going to do things better. I think what's going to happen in day 2 operations is companies are going to say, if I get the same result for a model that's massive, that costs me, let's say, $1 to run. And then I get a very similar result for a model that's very small for this specific use case and only costs me a penny to run. Like, why would I ever do that at scale for the bigger model? Like, I'll test with the bigger model, but then once I go into production, I'll go to the smaller model. And we're seeing that a lot. And, IBM's strategy is not to be a consumer-based AI company. We are AI for business. And we are really specializing around specific use cases. Like, we started with Japanese, we did code. Like, we're really building these custom built very small models, which we just open source a lot of them, to be able to kind of go to that smaller model size. So I think on the model side, I'm less excited about it. I think it's kind of like if you look at the ML world, there's like linear regression, multiple regression, like all these like kind of algorithms. No one really gets super excited about one over the other. You pick the one that's best suited for the data set and the use case. I think we're going to see the same thing on model side. What I am excited about is the use case and ROI, and specifically the intersection of embedding AI, allowing for better automation. And, I'm somewhat frustrated now because it seems that the ChatGPT crowd has kind of graduated to Copilot. And nothing against Microsoft Copilot, right? I'm a Microsoft Office user. But I was at a dinner last week and someone said the best use case that has emerged so far is someone who was English as a second language, couldn't really write great emails, are now writing amazing emails, right? Because of Copilot, it's kind of doing the wording change. And I think it was really kind of funny. But when you start getting into like true process automation, if I do something once a year, it takes 10 steps in my CRM system or HR system, how can I use automation to replicate and do the orchestration? Like if I'm talking about application management and there's indications that are things that are coming off and I could really quickly figure out there's a problem, get an evidence locker to be able to figure out what was the backdrop to actually what changed for that to come through, and then have a playbook to actually run it in self-healed application. Like when you start getting into the intersection of AI and automation and then the potential, like that's really what I think is game changing.
Back to the models though, the one thing I would say is that I think they've got to get smaller by definition. Some of it's more intentional, more use case driven, but also the way I look at it is kind of like a funnel. And if you're talking, maybe it's just enterprise that I'm thinking about here. But look, we have one model that's like 27 terabytes. By the time you remove duplicates, the time you remove copyright material, hate speech, everything, all of a sudden you're down eventually to about 7 terabytes. I get the point that the models don't excite you, but I don't know how an enterprise would use some of the open source models, taking the risk on copyright material, et cetera.
No, I think you're right on, right? So there's three things that are probably most important when it gets to models. And two of them I kind of hit on already. Price for performance is one. Like it's got to perform, right? You got to get a good answer out of it. And you got to have a price model that makes sense, right? Why pay $1 when you could pay a penny? Especially if you're doing it, 50 million times for a specific use case. Like most companies have $50 million incremental expense sitting around. They don't. The third one, I think you're right on, is trust. And most of the models to date have not shared their core data set. I just saw something, and I don't know if it's confirmed or not. It's hard to know in the news today of what's real, what's not, which kind of gets to the whole point of trust. But like when they kind of pushed on OpenAI and they said, like, what was your training data? Like you're getting sued by 5 different sources. Like the chief technical officer, you could Google it, had a terrible interview with the Wall Street Journal where it's like totally froze on like the question of what the source was. But like the one I saw last week was that the people who actually knew where the data are gone and then deleted their data file, right? Which is like what you typically see in a crime scene when the person is trying to get away with it. So I'm not suggesting anything, but you could kind of extrapolate that out for yourself. If I'm a company and I'm doing a customer forward application, and I know that right now, if these models get sued, it's not just the company that provided the model, it's sometimes the company that's using the model could be also part of that litigation. Like trust would be paramount to me. And I think a lot of companies put together policies out, but if you look at the stats of how many employees are bringing their own stuff and going around those models, it's actually scary, right? It's terrifying. So, if you're responsible for the operations of your company and you think, the strategy is the ostrich strategy, just putting your head in the ground and pretending it's not happening. Like, I feel like that's a recipe for disaster. So the whole trust thing, knowing the data source, having the hate bias, all those bad things that could potentially happen filtered out. Hugely, hugely important.
The negative on speed to market is trumping everything else for many of these companies. And I think they think they're going to pay the fine. I'll deal with it when it gets there. I'll pay the fine. I mean, it's no different as I've talked about before. I mean, and I'm not picking on Google here. I know we got a lot of qualifying statements here, but I mean, many years ago, they went to the universities, copied all the books so that they could use it for their search engine. What they didn't do is go to the authors, and ultimately the authors sued them. They paid them out. There's a lot of companies that have that same mindset. Hey, we'll just do that today. Surely we can afford it. Meanwhile, we'll push pace to market. We can't do that when you're dealing with enterprise. All right, so I'm going to pivot a little bit, leave it a little bit more fun with the remaining time that I have. And I'm going to ask you my favorite question, but it's not an easy one. What is true, but no one agrees with you on?
I love that question. A year ago, I would have said that the $10 billion Microsoft investment in OpenAI would be looked back on as being a terrible investment. And I think it's kind of getting closer now, right? Like Microsoft is kind of diversifying for OpenAI, like they're coming up with some other stuff. There's maybe some hints. I still feel like that's a little bit uncommon, right? Like who knows if Copilot and the lift that they got there is actually good. If you will allow me to, I will use that one. I would use that one as my still unpopular opinion, but I do feel like that's kind of a cop out for me because signs are kind of starting to lean in the direction to show that I'm right. Will you accept that one, or do you need?
No, I will accept it. So basically, you're saying, look, the Microsoft investment, $10 billion in OpenAI, is going to come to pass as a mistake.
A mistake. I think so. I think they could have done better with 10 billion if they, and who knows, I'm sure somebody listening is going to have a disagreement there, but that's the whole point of an unpopular opinion. I do think that in time it's going to say that that was a folly.
Is there any emerging technologies now that you're in tech sales?
The biggest one to me is the agents of agents, right? There's like all these virtual agents that are being born and they all do things specifically well. Like some parse through documents, some understand different languages. To me, these are all going to become assembly blocks that you're going to create a whole ecosystem of partners that are going to build niche verticalized applications that are going to all base off this agent of agent policy. So I don't think anybody's saying, no, you're crazy. Like that's not going to happen. I just think nobody actually sees it yet because we're in the early days of it. But if you can imagine modular agents that anybody can just pick them up and kind of service them together with like all of the stitching in the back end that's required to make this a seamless experience with all the governance and security that we need, like this is game changing. And I think we're going to start seeing these in the second half of this year, if not earlier. I think this is going to be when somebody looks back at this and they're going to be like, no, duh, of course, like we're doing this everywhere. That to me is very exciting.
With the pace of change, like what you're referencing, what should we be fearful of? I mean, you talked a little bit of trust, but besides trust, what do you think we should be fearful of?
I don't think we should fear anything. Honestly, no? I don't think we should fear anything. I think we should be optimistic about it because there's bad actors who are going to be trying to figure out the loopholes in every single thing. And that's probably the biggest concern here is security and what happens, what happens. I was with my parents over the weekend and I was telling them about the AI has gotten so good that they could spoof a person. And I said, hey, if you get a phone call from me and it sounds like me, but it's not from my number and they're saying I'm in distress and my kids are in distress, like ask a few kind of clarifying questions because like right now, like the AI technology is so good that like the bad person can figure out exactly how to kind of manipulate things for their own good, right? That's a little bit scary on the personal side, but the benefits far outweigh the bad for me, right? Like there's no reason to pause on that. I think some countries are maybe, trying to rein it in. And, I think some countries having governance and rules is good. Some countries that say any project has to be approved by the government is probably bad. But I think, I'm optimistic. And I also think that history has shown whenever anybody tries to put up speed bumps in front of innovation, the bad thing happens is that you get shadow kind of innovation and then you actually get the opposite effect. When
people start putting restrictions on, then others, what do you call it? Shadow organization. You work around it, and then bad things happen. That's what would give me pause. All right, like pivoting to a little bit of leadership. How do you describe your leadership style?
Yeah, I maybe I could turn this around on you too, and let me give an answer, and you tell
Oh,
me if
great.
it's right on or not. We could do a personal review right here in front of everyone.
Yeah, right here in front of 30,000 people. Perfect.
I like to think that I'm a servant leader, and I like to think that I'm firm and impactful. The best analogy that I could use, that hopefully you would agree with, is when the party is going great and everybody's having fun and there's no immediate impact, I'm in the back of the bar. But when the police show up and there's stress and there's something that's going wrong, I'm in the front of the bar and I'm trying to help out, right? I think that's probably the best summary is give people space to do their thing, but don't put anybody in a situation where they're going to fail out or kind of don't have the support to be able to get through it. So I don't know. Al, you experienced
I think
this
that's
now?
accurate. No, I would tell you, look, I reserve the right to change my mind someday, but I agree. It's certainly not command and control. I can tell you that. You are an influencer, and that helps to bring the organization together for alignment. Sometimes I do think you kind of know the answer as you're going into some of the questioning, though. You think that's right?
I think so. And, probably your users know you as the person asking the questions. I don't know if anybody's turned this around, but the gift that I have is that there are really senior leaders like yourself who I have, I have the joy or kind of the responsibility of working with, right? So it's not like I'm going to make you 100 times better because I don't, you're already so good. I think for me, it's, even an Olympic athlete needs a coach to do wind sprints, right? It's like, how do you push on certain things? How do you kind of challenge? How do we kind of shape? Like if there's things that I'm seeing that maybe you're not seeing, it's kind of how do I push on you on that? But, like you're not waiting for me to tell you how to do things, right? You're really, really good. And, you got the loyalty of your team and you kind of make, you're making the right decisions. So I don't know, Al, if you want to kind of do a self assessment there, but I think it's the way someone would manage you would probably be different than how they manage other people. And I think you're pretty self-sufficient and really, really good at what you do, that it's not like you need a lot of supervision.
But everybody needs a coach, to your point. I've learned that, I think that's crazy, actually. We're in the business world and we don't consider the need for coaches and even mentors for that matter, but coach is a little bit different. Every sports team that you can imagine would have a coach, and that's just taken for granted. I think every business leader needs a coach, and that's what business leaders should provide for one another. You get me to think differently, and I think that's what I appreciate most. We debate and we come to consensus. I love it.
Yeah.
Taking that a little bit further, how do you inspire and motivate teams? What's your recipe there?
Yeah, I think people want to do greatness, right? I think people want mastery and autonomy and purpose and life. That was something that was on a TED Talk a couple of years ago, and I think that stayed with me. The way that I like to inspire people is to kind of come up with a vision statement of what's possible. And as somebody once said to me, provide hope but define reality. Like don't sugarcoat the outcome. Like if it's a hard thing, so I like hard, other people like hard. But is the fruit worth the squeeze or the juice worth the squeeze? Like if you can get really qualified people and really talented, good, passionate people who have good chemistry, and you get a leader who can inspire everybody to become the best version of themselves and achieve a common goal, like those are the companies that are unstoppable. And I think the key there for any leader is it's not about you, right? Your job is an aggregation. In a way, you are a vessel. And all the goodness and love that comes to you, your job is to share it back so that people feel inspired and motivated to be the best version of themselves. And it's not about propping the leader up. Like the biggest thing that I'm working through is that, when I'm up on stage or I'm talking, sometimes you get that embarrassment or kind of that imposter syndrome. But I think the better way to look at it is your team wants you to be big. They want you to be big. They want you to be somebody they can be proud of, but they want to know that you care about them. And I think that's the key, right? Leading with empathy, but also inspiring and embracing the fact that you're in the role and you're the leader of the team. And, with that comes a kind of a certain expectation that people want from you.
Ayal, you are always fantastic to talk to. I know we riddled with a lot of questions. See how fast it goes. There's some people, as I say, that are very easy to talk to. We could go on and on. The time flies. Like anyway,
quick flies out because you're so good at this. And I always said this to you. Like it's an honor, honestly, to be on. I don't know if we had as much laughs as we possibly could have, which might be a reason to come back to another. We'll just do a whole comedy set. on the next time.
People don't know us behind the scenes. We're going to have to open that up so we can have some fun and people can laugh at us, laughing at ourselves. Hey, I'll end with this though, because I do want to be respectful with your time. Anything next for you personally? And I always want to grab something from you. What are you learning today before I left? I know two completely different questions, but I thought I'd finish with those.
So I'm hoping to be in this role for a period of time that I could finish something. And I got a mission around kind of making the user and the whole user experience and the developer and kind of bringing down the line a little bit to more kind of figuring out the user experience with IBM. I think that's important to me. What I'm lately thinking about, and this probably will launch into a whole other potential hour, but I'll just hint at it without going on it too much, is I'm realizing I always thought companies existed for the customer. Like companies basically create a service or a product that customers get value out of that makes the world better. I always thought that. Now I'm realizing there's a whole investor side of this. And in a way, companies are attractive to figure out how investors would want to spend their next dollar on one company over the other company. And those two things are actually really related, right? If you get it right by the customer and you provide a service and you do it in a way that's operationally strong, right? You're making a profit, then investors will want to invest in you. The same reason we talked about in video before, right? You get the moat, you get future expectation. I'm realizing, and maybe it's just my own maturity as I'm kind of going through the process, is that companies exist as much for the investor as they do for the customer or the user. And, it's been pretty profound on me and like how I actually think about operations and, how the two are related, though different.
And learning, what are you learning today? Is that what you're learning?
I'm like a sponge. I'm learning about these agents of agents. I'm learning about AI. I'm learning a ton around infrastructure and setting up infrastructure and hybrid cloud. I'm an endless learner. I have a son who's going to be off to college. I got a son and two daughters. My son is going off to college. I'm learning what does it mean to go to university and program in the US and kind of how to navigate that process.
Good luck.
I'm just, I'm trying to run. I'm trying to be healthy. I got no shortage of stuff. I'm just,
you still playing pickleball?
Yeah, I'm with a group of guys that are so committed and good, but I wish I could always be better, but I'm working on it and I'm having a good time and it's an important part of my kind of regular schedule, but I'm kind of petering off. Everybody else is getting really good. And I feel like I got to work on a few kind of core basic things to get back on the top part of the group.
Just keep buying the beer and they'll continue to invite you back. I'm sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. They're really good. They're getting really, really good. All of them are getting better and better from where we started. So I'm just trying to keep up. That's all.
You are awesome. Thank you for taking the time today. I presume folks can reach you best places on LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is perfect. Yeah, I got a little bit of a article that I do, probably not weekly, every once in a month. I'm getting a little bit lazy on it. Selling with Data. Please follow me. And any ideas or feedback from this or anything, any ideas, please shoot me a direct message on LinkedIn.
By the way, listeners, I will put a link in the show notes, but you've got to read the Selling with Data. Very good stuff. Very good stuff. It's not like he's just writing to write. There's a lot of research that goes behind that. So it's fabulous. I learn a lot when I read it. Thanks again, Ayal. I appreciate you being here. It's fabulous as always. Yeah, we'll have a comedy hour at some point. Today, we got through a lot of material. Listeners, thank you for listening. Hit me on almartintalksdata@gmail.com at any time. We'd love to hear from you. Rate us where you can. Until next time, we will see you on the podcast. Thank you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed the podcast with Ayal. I just want to remind everybody that we are not providing stock advice. Please see your personal fiduciary for that. We're just talking. Have a good one. Talk to you next time.